To deliver today's keynote address, we have Senator Juan Edgardo Sonny Angara, Finance Committee Chairman of the 18th Congress. He was actively involved in tax reform efforts in the previous Congress, and we know that COVID-19 efforts will hold a very special place in his heart, having gone through the ordeal himself last year. Ladies and gentlemen, let's all welcome Senator Sonny Angara.
Thank you, Mimi. Can you guys hear me? Sorry, just want to check.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. Hi, good morning, everyone. To Jaime Augusto Zobel of Ayala Corp. Good morning, sir. And the other folks at Ayala. We have Paolo Borromeo of AC Health. Just want to say the folks over at Qualimed have the lightest hands. I did my PCR test there about 2 weeks ago before flying to El Nido, and I think that's something we all appreciate after having done, especially if you're one of the folks who've done 20 PCR tests or more. You know, I think you're able to judge, and you appreciate those light hands. But thank you for hosting, and thank you for your efforts in helping the government, Jaime. And from Ateneo also, Father Bobby Yap, the president, and Dean Ron, Dean Jet, from the Schools of Government and Schools of Business. Thank you for this timely forum. Thank you for inviting me. Our friends from media and academe, Coco Alcuaz is here. Of course, Secretary Vince Dizon is joining us later. Bill Luz, Cosette Canilao, who are also working with precisely on the hopefully coming up with a good PPP bill in the committee of in the Public Works Committee headed by Senator Manny Pacquiao. To our other co-panelists, thank you again for inviting. Thank you for your remarks, and thank you for inviting the government. And of course, we know how difficult it has been, as Jaime and Father Bobby have set forth earlier, so much strife and human suffering in such a short period of time. But it has also seen some notable feats of human cooperation, compassion, ingenuity, and selflessness. We've seen servant leaders, as Father Bobby has said, and more importantly, as we put it succinctly in our own vernacular, we've seen bayanihan in action. We've seen the DTI and select manufacturers work hand in hand to transform assembly lines to produce face masks and PPEs instead of the usual uniforms or children's clothes, which we don't have use for at the moment, but hopefully with the resumption of face-to-face classes, we will. We've seen distilleries for alcoholic products similarly refashioned to produce alcohol and other disinfectants. The private sector, as mentioned earlier, has mobilized to feed more than 14 million Filipinos in the Greater Manila area. One of these initiatives was Project Ugnayan of the Philippine Disaster Resilience Foundation of Bill Luz, which tapped Caritas Manila's vast network of clergy and parishioners to distribute grocery vouchers to millions, tens of millions, I would say, in Metro Manila. Thank you. Late last year, the DOLE, or the Labor Department, forged an agreement with the IT BPAP or IBPAP to help match the thousands of returning OFWs with job vacancies in the BPO sector. Reportedly, 40,000 returnees have already been connected to 36 BPO companies. Thank you. When our testing capacities needed to be ramped up, several multi-stakeholder initiatives were launched to set up laboratories and clinics across the country, leading to the formation of the Public-Private Task Force T3, Test, Trace, and Treat. And in all T's, in testing, tracing, and treating, the role of the private sector has been crucial. And now the private sector will be crucial in preparing with the national COVID-19 vaccine roadmap. And this is the recovery and resilience phase set forth by Jaime earlier in his welcome remarks. In every instance and more, we saw bayanihan in action. In every instance, there were different organizations and groups working together, collaborating, and cooperating. There was no clear divide between the public and private sector. All we saw was a network of people moving in concerted action. All we saw was a nation seeking help from its partners to survive and to weather the crisis, the biggest and most challenging in our lifetime. What should be clear to us now is this heightened level of engagement between government agencies, private companies, the academe, civil society needs to continue even after the pandemic. Resilience as the third stage, as mentioned earlier, but most especially because of the critical tasks at hand, we need to immunize our people. But beyond that, as we reopen the economy, we need to build back more resilient, and more inclusive, as mentioned earlier. A day or two before we received our first COVID-19 vaccine doses, with PGH Director Legazpi, Dr. Legazpi being the first Filipino to be legally vaccinated, the President signed into law the National COVID-19 Vaccination Program Act, which we sponsored in the Senate. And some important features of this is that we have enabled local government units and private entities to procure their vaccines, subject to certain guidelines in coordination with the IATF and the DOH. In this manner, we freed up even more resources, both public and private, to procure the vaccine doses we need. Now, with this policy framework in place, the real work of operationalizing the national vaccine roadmap nationwide must begin. And again, we need the public and private sectors to collaborate again, as this is a quite unprecedented effort. I think the most the government has ever vaccinated in 1 year is 5 million people. And now we seek to vaccinate 70 million people, or 75% of our population, to achieve that desired herd immunity. Not only will we need to pool as much funds as we can to procure vaccines, we also need to ensure the necessary logistics are in place. So storage, transport, etc. Again, privates will be crucial. These partnerships will be needed to ensure that we have enough vaccinators as well in the shortest amount of time to man and to help those 4,500 envisioned vaccine centers or places. Our joint efforts will also be needed to convince a majority of our people about the necessity and safety of the vaccines approved for rollout. A recent survey that found that 46% of respondents said they are unwilling to get vaccinated, as compared to only 19% who said they were willing to do so. So that is a huge challenge going forward. While much has been done in the past year, the work of enhancing the capacities of our local health systems will need to continue, with us not yet out of the woods. Over the weekend, we recorded 3,000 new cases on Saturday. Hopefully this uptick doesn't continue and snowball into another wave of infections. The IATF has also lifted mandatory RT-PCR testing and quarantines for travelers, unless required by the local government units. This means that our local government units will need to boost their abilities to test, trace, and treat COVID-19 cases. Again, another test for public and private partnerships. Indeed, as more of our people start venturing out to the malls, restaurants, and their places of work, it's incumbent upon us in the private and public sectors to make sure that health and safety protocols are strictly followed in our places of business. We need to make sure we reopen our economy safely and reasonably. We may have already started on the path to herd immunity, but it doesn't mean we are out of the pandemic. If we can immunize our people expediently and prevent any more COVID-19 infections, we can survive this pandemic. But for us to emerge stronger and more resilient, we need to start thinking ahead and plant the seeds of our future growth and prosperity today. One of those seeds should have economic self-reliance as one of its fruits. So earlier I mentioned the shortage of PPEs and other critical products, and but there was a pivot of a sort, and as the global demand of these products skyrocketed, many countries we saw them implement bans and building up their own reserves and stockpiles, to our detriment. But this is where we saw action on the part of the DTI and select manufacturers and garment producers, the Board of Investments. So now we have a steady supply of coveralls and face masks. And we're also trying to convince some of the international manufacturers to make the Philippines a hub and market for their PPEs. So if anything, the pandemic has shown us that our consumption-driven, import-heavy economy is not all that resilient after all, especially when faced with a public emergency that restricts our people from roaming freely and spending their money across the country. We need to build up our local capacities to produce more of the things we need and we use, but also with an eye on exporting these once we are capable of doing so. So allow me, friends, to talk a little bit about the CreateBuild sponsored by Senator Pia Cayetano, where we were thankful to her for accepting amendments from this representation that were about growing our local pool of enterprises that could supply to domestic and global value chains, reduce our dependence on imports, and expand domestic supply of products. These are reflected in the measure that's now awaiting the President's signature. Specifically, we pushed for additional language in the function of the more powerful Fiscal Incentives Review Board, so that the FIRB will adopt policies to focus on the domestic supply chain as a way for reducing dependence on imports and promoting diversification and sophistication of products, as well as catering to local demand. We also made amendments such that the Strategic Investments Priorities Plan, or the roadmap, which all investment promotion agencies must follow, and is submitted for the President's approval, should include recommendations on non-fiscal support that will grow our pool of globally competitive MSMEs, whose products should be increasingly complex and sophisticated. We've also complemented this by giving the President the power to act on these recommendations and grant effective financial support via the national budget. The idea here is that the President has the power, upon recommendation from the FIRB and the BOI, to roll out programs similar to the CARS programs, which were started under a previous administration. To be clear, this isn't the first time the clarion call has been sounded for more things to be made in the country or to be made in the Philippines, but where previous iterations had focused on codifying or legislating some sort of preference for domestic products and shielding them from foreign competition. Today's Made in the Philippines initiative should be about improving the quality of the things we make, ensuring they pass muster in the global market and in terms of quality and quantity, and expanding our capabilities as a nation so that we start offering more sophisticated, more complex products and services. In 2019, my office started what we call the Tatak Pinoy, or Proudly Filipino program, aimed at helping Filipino industries and professionals become more globally competitive. Fortunately, COVID happened and somewhat sidetracked some of the funding we had put in some of the agencies like the DTI, which we helped give a unprecedented budget increase, but all of that was recalled for the Bayanihan one effort to give the SAP, or the allowances, to the marginalized. So that was a black swan event. Definitely that was not envisioned, but at some point we can get back on track. And through this initiative, the country produces and exports more complex, high-value products and services, encourages more investment, and creates more job opportunities at home for Filipinos. Several birds with one stone. With the pandemic, this program is fast becoming an attempt to help jumpstart our economy and build back a more resilient, more inclusive economy. Let me say a bit about economic complexity. This is something Dean Ron and the folks at the Ateneo School of Government should be familiar with, where the framework we're following is based on the studies of Professors Hausman of Harvard and Cesar Hidalgo of MIT on how economic complexity is the best indicator and determinant for whether a country prospers or not. For them, economic complexity is a measure of the productive know-how in a society, as expressed in the products and services it offers. Their main thesis is that an entire country becomes prosperous when it produces and trades a diverse array of products and services that are complex and that are uncommon, meaning not produced by many countries. The better a country is able to leverage diversity of a people's know-how, its economic complexity, the more likely it will prosper. In their 2016 Atlas of Economic Complexity, they wrote, modern societies can amass large amounts of productive knowledge because they distribute bits and pieces of it among its many members. But to make use of it, this knowledge has to be put back together through organizations and markets. Our most prosperous modern societies are wiser, not because their citizens are individually brilliant, but because these societies hold a diversity of know-how and because they are able to recombine it to create a large variety of smarter and better products. Maybe to apply it to some of the ideas set forth earlier, like Jaime mentioned the healthcare system, where we have the most brilliant doctors and healthcare professionals, but somehow the health infrastructure still is lagging behind. So if we were to put Hausman's ideas into motion, then we have to work on not just making sure those brilliant individuals don't leave the way so many of them do, and perhaps contribute within the Philippine context. And definitely government has to step up in this regard. The idea of economic complexity is better understood with another idea called person bites. According to Hausman and Hidalgo, person bites represent the totality of education, skills, and experience and know-how that is required for a product to be produced or a service to offer. So according to this formulation, raw agricultural produce is equivalent to one person bite, while an airplane with its thousands of different components requires tens of thousands of person bites. Hausman and Hidalgo and their respective teams devised a way of measuring a country's economic complexity. And in their 2018 version of the Atlas, Japan rated #1 as the most economically complex country in the world, while Nigeria was last at 133. The Philippines ranked 35th, which isn't bad, considering it places us 4th in the ASEAN, behind only Singapore at #5, Thailand at 22, and Malaysia 26, and ahead of countries like Canada, India, and New Zealand. What what is additionally notable is that we jumped 10 spots from 2008, suggesting that we must have been doing something right during those years. So not many people know perhaps that we manufacture the insides of Boeing airplanes somewhere in Batangas, and also the insides of some iPhones and some cameras and other complex gadgets. So the challenge is for us to scale up in terms of complexity, and that will produce more jobs on our shores. So why is it that even with our respectable rankings in economic complexity, many of our people are still mired in poverty? That's a problem our Tatak Pinoy program aims to investigate. One possible explanation is that though we have good ingredients, we somehow don't have the recipe to make them into something appetizing. According to the 2020 Global Innovation Index, we are first in the world when it comes to high-tech imports as a percentage of total trade, and third in terms of high-tech net exports. However, we are only 81st in terms of patents by origin per billion of GDP and 91st for PCT patents. It appears that even though some of the world's top technologies pass through our factories, we're not developing new knowledge or technology ourselves. Since we launched Tatak Pinoy, we've sat down with government agencies and consulted industry associations, individual entrepreneurs, and workers on how we can help them offer better quality products and services. We envision it not as a simple government program, but just really more getting a network of people together to solve and to do whatever it needs to provide solutions to all of our entrepreneurs, to our privates in producing quality goods and services. Just last week, my staff met with some loom weavers and pottery and tile makers in Vigan with the help of Synergia Foundation and the local government executives. And we'll be doing one in La Union this week, on Thursday, I believe. What we've learned so far is that each product and service, given their respective value chains, has their own set of problems and challenges. Not one government agency or private sector initiative can solve all of them by itself. But to make products and services, Filipino products and services that we are truly proud of, a host of initiatives is needed. What we need is a network of solutions. What we need are public-private collaborations, the topic of today's discussions. This brings us back to the immense challenge of jumpstarting our recovery and building back a better economy. Many have highlighted that with the K-shaped recovery that we are experiencing today, our focus should turn towards micro, small, and medium enterprises, given that many of them were hit the hardest as a result of the quarantine. The Ateneo Policy Center has a forthcoming report wherein they highlight the critical role the country's biggest conglomerates can play in building the more inclusive and hence more resilient economy. This study points out that in 2018, the country's 15 biggest conglomerates, companies like Ayala, SMC, Aboitiz, purchased and used nearly 15% of all intermediate inputs in the country. While it isn't clear whether these imports were imported or not, what is certain is that these 15 giant companies would be generating a lot of broad-based economic activity if they sourced more of their inputs from local MSMEs. And this is a challenge for our local MSMEs to scale up their quality and their production. In fact, some are already doing this with very good results. And the question then would be, how can more of our local enterprises be part of the value chains of their big brother counterparts? And this is something we can pursue going forward. Closer public and private sector collaboration should be part of our new next normal. And with the immense challenges we face as a society, it should be the rule rather than the exception. To do that, we need to drastically reimagine our conceptions of what public and private sector should and should not be doing. In today's highly networked age, we need to accept the reality that those boundaries may no longer be useful for us. There is only one Team Philippines, and by synergizing our efforts, not only would we be immunizing our people faster and reopening our economy more in a safer and quicker fashion, we would also be enhancing everything that would make the Tatak Pinoy or Proudly Filipino something that we could be proud of to showcase to the rest of the world. The late Tourism Secretary Ramon Jimenez once said, "It is a measure of our greatness that we take life in groups and that we gather around common hopes and common dreams." And though much has been said about our occasional failure to rally behind crucial issues and causes, more than once before, we have come together when coming together counted most. In the face of the pandemic and the deepest economic recession we've had in many decades, let us all come together when it comes the most. So thank you very much to all the organizers for this chance.